So you have an idea for a story. You sit down at your computer and type chapter 1 at the top of the page. You sit there for a few minutes and nothing happens. It's as if the gap between your story idea and the book itself is just too wide to cross. What do? In this video, I want to help you bridge that gap and give you all the tools that you need to construct a basic outline to help you turn your idea into a full-length novel. Open up your writing software or get out a piece of paper and something to write with. Follow along with this video all the way to the end and you will have the first draft to your outline ready to go. Let's bring your idea to life. Every story begins with an idea. An island where everything is tiny, a monster beyond comprehension, a barbarian in a pre-Ice Age world, a war, but in space. Before you can create an outline, you need to know what your story is going to be about. We are going to construct an example outline today using the following idea. A sword that can talk and grant people the ability to fight like masters. Just something that we can use for today. Write down the idea for your story as a short sentence at the top of your outline. No matter how big or complex your world is, the story itself should be able to be condensed into a single sentence. Once we have our idea, we can expand on it as we continue to construct our outline. What makes a story compelling? No matter the medium, there are certain elements that are always present in every good story. 1. A character or characters. 2. Your character's desire. What do they want? 3. An antagonist, or some force preventing the protagonist from getting what they want. 4. A fierce struggle to achieve this want. And 5. The success or failure of the characters. If you are missing even one of these 5 elements, your story will lack substance. Character, want, prevention, struggle, success/failure. Write down your story foundation right beneath your story idea. Let's figure out the foundation of our example story. Our characters are the talking sword, Regalius, and the young man who discovers him, Linus. Regalius wants to take revenge on the immortal villain who trapped his soul in a sword, and Linus wants to be a strong, confident hero like the characters in his video games. Regalius is prevented from taking his vengeance because he can barely move without Linus's help, and Linus is normally a skinny weeb without Regalius's power. The pair struggle against those who would seek to steal Regalius and take his power for their own, fighting in many battles and overcoming challenges together. By the end, Regalius fails to take his vengeance, sacrificing himself to save Linus, and Linus succeeds in becoming a strong, confident hero by rising to the occasion and defeating the villain with only his own talent and wit. This actually sounds pretty good. I'd read this book. Now you might be thinking that this story sounds a little bit familiar. You might be thinking of a movie or a book that is very similar to this exact concept. There's a good reason you feel that way. Let's talk about that next. Stories have been written throughout all of human history, telling the fantastical tales of people becoming their best selves to overcome their trials. Humans latch on to this type of story and feel inspired by it. In its most fundamental form, every heroic tale follows the same pattern: the hero's journey. You've probably heard of it. There is a very good reason why people have been using this story structure throughout history, whether they know it or not. So many stories follow this method of storytelling because it is nearly guaranteed to work. People want to believe that they are capable of change. By watching a character that they identify with overcome their trials, the reader can feel the thrill of victory, even if it's only for a moment. The joy that this feeling brings is timeless. You should never feel that your story is derivative if it ends up falling in line with the hero's journey. There are many things that can lead to a boring story, but this is not one of them. I'm not saying that you must use the hero's journey to outline your story. I'm simply saying that it's a perfectly natural structure for any good story to fall into. Don't try to actively avoid it without good reason. With your foundation in place, it's time to add some supports. There are 3 major qualities that we must consider when putting together our story: character arcs, themes, and pacing. As we begin to flesh out these 3 pillars, the plot will almost write itself. All 3 of these pillars must be given equal care and attention. If any one of them is weaker than the others, the entire story will crumble. Let's start with the most fun part. In its simplest form, a character arc is a journey from an emotional point A to an emotional point B. That change, whether it be for the better or worse, is what makes your characters more sympathetic and your story more enticing. Let's start with our protagonist. At the top of one of your pages, write down your character's name, along with their weight, height, hair color, favorite ice cream, favorite K-pop band, all of their superpowers, and their entire lineage dating back over 1,000 years. Just kidding. Literally none of that matters right now. All that we need at this moment is their biggest flaw that they will overcome or fail to overcome by the end of the story. This flaw needs to be real and visceral, preferably something people struggle with on a daily basis. Distrust, selfishness, hubris, anger, racism, sexism, cowardice, self-hatred. All of these things are true to the human experience and are the things that people often wish to change about themselves. Readers latch on to characters that share the same emotional struggles as they do and can find a powerful form of catharsis in watching them succeed or learn from their mistakes should they fail. Let's look at our main characters from our example outline. Linus's greatest flaws will be his cowardice and insecurity. Characters do not need to overcome all of their flaws by the end of a book, but they must focus on at least one of them. For this story, Linus will need to learn to overcome his cowardice and rise to the occasion, and Regalius will need to overcome his lust for revenge and bloodshed to see the bigger picture. I want this story to mostly have a happy ending, so I will say that they both succeed on their emotional journey and find peace by the end. Once you know your character's flaw, we need to determine what their desires and needs are. Not those kind of desires and needs, you perverts. Every character starts their journey wanting something that they don't have. Fame, fortune, the partner of their dreams, power, a parent who listens. It is a perfectly natural thing for people to want these things, but a crucial part of character growth is learning to pursue what you need rather than strictly pursue what you want. At the beginning of most stories, our characters can't tell the difference between their wants and needs. Needs are often internal and can be things like empathy, passion, or forgiveness of the self and others. So write down what your character wants and thinks that they need, and then write down what they actually need to be happy. This can take a little bit of self-reflection, so take your time on this one. Pause the video if you need to give it a thought, and give it a like while you're at it. For our example, Linus wants the respect of those around him, but needs to learn to respect himself. Regalius wants revenge on the villain that trapped his soul in the sword, but he needs temperance to quell his bloodlust and to learn to trust his wielder. Once we got all that, we can determine if our character arc will be a hard lesson or a soft lesson. An outcome where your character doesn't acquire the thing that they desire but still becomes a better person is a hard lesson. But if they do acquire their external want while becoming a better person, then they get a soft lesson. It's kind of the difference between a bittersweet ending and a completely happy ending. Linus will get a soft lesson where he learns self-respect, overcomes his cowardice, and earns the respect of his friends and family. Regalius will get a hard lesson where he learns temperance and to trust others, but fails to be the one to achieve his vengeance. We know where they start and where they end up. But what is standing in their way? Let's talk about my favorite part of the story, the bad guy. I could talk about villains all day long. I love them so much because they are the living embodiment of what makes us worse as people. They are our obstacles personified into an absolute bastard for our hero to defeat. Now that we know what our character's goals and motivations are, we can easily create our antagonist based on those things. An antagonist is any force, whether it be a person, setting, or even the protagonist themselves, that is acting against the desires of our protagonist. Let's call our example antagonist Gabriel, an immortal conqueror that has lived among humanity for centuries and is also the being that trapped Regalius in a sword centuries ago. Linus wants strength and confidence, and now that he has Regalius at his side, he has both of those things. But Gabriel intends to steal that away from him by reclaiming his weapon. Linus wants to hold on to his newfound power, so he goes on the run. We have our protagonist, and we have the antagonist trying to take what they want. We could go much deeper if we wanted to, giving Gabriel his own wants, his needs, and even giving him his own arc, but to keep this video from going on too long, I'm just going to keep his role really simple. Already the story is beginning to take shape, and we haven't even started writing the plot yet. Now you might be thinking,
what do you mean we haven't started on the plot yet? There's just so much plot written down here.
Not quite. All of the details we have written are strictly what is needed to tell a story. All that a plot actually is an arrangement of events that lead to each of the plot points that we have discussed so far. Think of the plot as the journey rather than the destinations. Now that we have all of our characters' flaws, needs, wants, and outcomes in mind, it's time to tie them all together. What is your book about? I used to hate getting that question because the only answer I could think to give was a sequence of plot points. I could never give an answer that sounded intellectual or interesting without reciting a synopsis of the book. When someone brings up the concept of theme, I cringe because all I could think about is needlessly digesting every line of a book back in English class. God, I hated English class. I still believe to this day that theme is incredibly arbitrary. It will always fall upon the reader to determine what the theme of your book is, because if you explicitly state that your book is about X, a random reader could say it's about Y, and to them, it would be subjectively correct. Write down a short paragraph on what you believe this story means to you, as if it was assigned to you in your high school English class. There are really no wrong or right answers here. Once you know what the book means to you, your dialogue and prose will carry so much more weight, as you are able to imbue your writing with subtext that elevates your story to a whole new level. This is what separates a bland story from a story written with heart. Here's an example of how I would describe the theme of our story. A Boy and His Blade is a coming-of-age tale about self-respect, what it means to be strong. If you can't respect yourself, then you can't expect anyone else to either. That's it. That's all it takes. Once you write down your theme, cement it into the back of your thoughts and always keep it in mind as you continue constructing your outline and start writing your book. If you can't think of anything right away, that's okay. Sometimes you don't know what the theme of your book is until your first draft is done. Try your best to figure it out as soon as you can, but don't hold off on starting the book if you aren't sure immediately. With our character arcs and themes ready to go, the only pillar we need is pacing. Before we do that though, it's finally time that we get to work on the plot itself. It's finally time for us to get to work on the plot. Many newer authors, myself included, have made the mistake of starting the outline process here before working on character arcs and themes. When I first wrote Festival of the Azure Moon, my outline was basically just a sequence of events and plot points. I had only a few ideas of who my characters were, but didn't really pay much attention to proper character arcs. It wasn't until I was about halfway through the first draft that I realized that something just wasn't right. The story just seemed boring. Sure, cool stuff was happening and the fights were badass, but that only goes so far. I scrapped the entire draft and rewrote it only after reading a few books on character arcs and plotting. I'll link a few good ones in the description below. A lot of what I'm doing in this video is reiterating things that I've read about in other people's books. I'll link a few good books on character arcs and plotting down below for those of you who want to have further reading on the subject. I would highly recommend it. I'm very glad I did that rewrite. It took me twice as long to write the book, but it was way better and gave me the tools I needed to improve every book that came afterwards. If you still haven't done the first steps of this video, please do not start on your plot until you have. You will save yourself a ton of time and your story will be better for it. So where exactly does a plot begin? On your outline draft, write down opening chapters at the top of the page. This doesn't include the prologue. We will talk about prologues in another video, but for right now, let's not worry about that. Under this heading, write a brief summary of your opening chapters. It is very important that you highlight your character's flaw, the life that they currently live before the story begins, touch upon what they want, and if you're feeling spicy, add a pinch of your story's theme. Just a pinch, or you could sound preachy. Here's a good example. We begin with Linus as a burned-out college kid. On a walk home from his fencing club, we show his jealousy for the top students in his class. He gets a text from his coworkers borderline ordering him to cover for them because they know he won't refuse. Either through dialogue or prose, we display his desire to be strong and respected despite having very little respect for himself. Next, make a new heading and title it Inciting Incident. It is here that your character's flaw is put on full display and something about their life just isn't right. Your character may not fully recognize what their flaw truly is yet, or perhaps they just don't know how to approach it. But either way, it is highlighted for the reader to see. By the end of the inciting incident, your character should figure out what their external goal is or what their want is. They will be blind to what they need because for the first time in their lives, what they want is actually within reach. Here's an example. On another walk home, Linus is caught in an alley by muggers. He gives them all of his money, but when they ask for his dead mother's ring, he refuses. He manages to break away and run after getting a lucky hit in, but takes a fall into a running river where he discovers Regalius. Upon bonding with him, he uses his newfound strength and skills to chase off his attackers. Now let's get into the meat of the story. Make a new section and write down Pursuit of the External Goal. Now that your character's flaw and external goal are known, it's time for them to begin their journey. Write down what happens as your character makes their first attempt to reach their external goal. Remember, since your external goal is tied to your flaw, they can't truly succeed in reaching it until their flaw is overcome. For now, they will fail in reaching their goal even if they succeed in other ways. This will show the reader that the character's internal journey is far more important than their external one, even if the character doesn't quite know that yet. For example, Linus and Regalius will become friends, and will be a very successful duo in Linus's fencing club. Sure, Linus earns the respect he wants, but he can't help but feel unfulfilled since Regalius seems to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Next up, make a new section and title it Antagonist Revealed. If your book has multiple points of view, you may have already revealed your antagonist in some form to your reader, and that's perfectly fine. In this section, we're going to determine how your antagonist is revealed to your character. In many cases, the antagonist reveal could be the same scene as the inciting incident, but that's up to you. You should already have a pretty good idea of who your antagonist is going to be by this point. Their goals should be directly tied to the character's goals or to the theme of the story. Their reveal should reflect that. In our example, the antagonist Gabriel discovers the sword that once gave him the edge over his immortal peers has been found. He approaches Linus and offers to buy it so that he may have the strength he needs to overpower the other immortals that secretly run the world. Linus refuses to give up his newfound strength, and Regalius attempts to take his revenge on the spot without considering Linus's safety. When Gabriel tries to take it by force, Linus barely escapes with his life and is forced into hiding. As you can see, Gabriel's motivations are similar to Linus's, just on a different level. He wants to be able to earn the respect, or maybe even the fear, of his peers, and Linus wants to do the same. Both of their goals are tied to who has possession over Regalius. Next up, add a section called Failure Number 1. Sounds ominous, doesn't it? In this section, your character is pushed further away from their external goal, either by the antagonist, their flaw, or a combination of both. Write down one major scene in which your character fails to achieve their goal, or expand upon a previous failure. In our example, we will expand upon our antagonist reveal. When Gabriel tries to take back Regalius, Linus is given a true challenge for the first time since attaining his new power. Regalius' skill on its own is not enough to beat Gabriel, and Linus gives in to fear. Without his full attention and commitment, Regalius struggles to wield himself through Linus, and they are soundly defeated. After barely escaping, Linus is reminded that he is only a pathetic child, pretending to be impressive. Next, title a section called Contemplation. Here, we get to kick our character while they are down and force them to have a hint of self-reflection. They shouldn't overcome their flaw just yet, but they should at least begin to notice it's there. Write down a few ideas for scenes where the character's flaw can be put on full display for the reader to see, usually through some form of dialogue, self-reflection, or a combination of both. In our example, Regalius blames Linus for their failure. He tells him that if they want any hope of beating Gabriel, they must learn to work better together. The only way for that to happen is if Linus can learn to become more of a warrior himself to better synchronize with Regalius. Linus still fails to have faith in himself and instead tries to find a way to break the bond with Regalius, but only after he has won the championship fencing competition to attain the respect that he longs for. He agrees to train with Regalius using the championship as a motivator, but in secret, he searches for a way to back out of their deal. Title your next section, Antagonist Attacks. Our main character has only just begun to soften and change their behavior just a tad since their last defeat. Now it's time for our antagonist to strike. This attack can be executed by minions or by the antagonist themselves. Since our character has still not changed, they are defeated again. Their external goal should be driven further away than before. For our example, just before the final day of the fencing tournament, Gabriel finds where Linus and Regalius have been training somehow. Perhaps Linus was betrayed by a perceived ally, attacked by a jealous rival, or maybe he made some sort of mistake that outed them. How this happens can be hashed out later, but for now, we know that Linus must be defeated once more, but the consequences are far worse. Regalius is taken, but before the bond can be severed, Regalius gives Linus a means to escape once more, but badly wounded. For our next section, title it Giving Up. The protagonist's external goal should be so far out of reach by this point that it is nearly unattainable. They must now change their goal to something entirely unrelated. They're basically, well, giving up. After Regalius is taken, Linus feels more powerless than he did before. He doesn't believe he can win the tournament or save Regalius on his own. He gathers all of his fencing equipment to sell so that he can afford to flee across the country to avoid Gabriel. Things are looking pretty bleak, but our story isn't over yet. It's now or never, people. Our protagonist needs a kick in the ass. In fact, let's make that the title of your next section, Kick in the Ass. Your protagonist has been falling victim to their flaw for long enough. Something or someone needs to hold a mirror to them and wake them up from what is truly holding them back. Write down a few ideas for who will slap some sense into your hero or how they will do it. This can be an ally, rival, mentor, or an event that forces retrospection. I'll give a couple of examples since either one can work. For our first example, Linus is on his way to the pawn shop with his fencing equipment when he walks past another person being mugged. He contemplates pretending he didn't see anything, but he can't bring himself to do it. With a practiced weapon in hand, he rushes the muggers and beats them back using the skills taught to him by Regalius and his mentors. In doing so, he realizes that he is far stronger than he gives himself credit for, and that he is worthy of respect. In a different example, Linus is on his way to the pawn shop but is confronted by his fencing instructor. He gives Linus a harsh reality check and tells him that his old bullies only treated him badly because they were jealous of his progress. He was always worthy of respect, and that he was always harder on himself than anyone else was on him. Alright, let's title our next section, Final Drive. Here, our protagonist has overcome their flaw and is ready to return to their original goal or a similar goal with a renewed drive. They know now what was holding them back and will not let it get in their way again. It is clear that they must defeat the antagonist to achieve it, even if it seems possible. You must now write a few ideas for scenes that can show that your protagonist has changed. Perhaps it's a scene of self-reflection or some kind of symbolic sacrifice. In our example, Linus will sell his fencing gear, but instead of buying a plane ticket, he buys everything he thinks he will need to rescue Regalius and begins preparing to storm Gabriel's tower. Now, my favorite section is here at last. The main reason that I write books is to get to this section, the final battle. This is where we get to have fun. Write down a few ideas for how the final battle will be set up and what will take place. Make a plan for your hero, but prepare for something to inevitably go wrong. Bonus points if what goes wrong is tied to the theme. This disaster must be drastic. The more hopeless you can make things seem, the better. In our example, Linus infiltrates Gabriel's tower to find Regalius, subduing a few minions along the way. He reaches his trusty blade and has a moment where he takes on a large number of minions with Regalius in his hand. When Gabriel inevitably appears, they begin their battle atop the tower. Using cheap tricks, Gabriel gets the upper hand and is about to deal the killing blow. Regalius overcomes his lust for vengeance and sacrifices himself to save Linus. With his goal destroyed, Gabriel is thrown into a blinding rage. And now we have arrived. Title this section, The Final Blow. Everything seems hopeless, but it's not over yet. Your hero has overcome their flaw and will now use their enlightened state to win the day. Write down how your hero's new look on life can be what wins him this fight. It is important that their victory be directly tied to their change, or the fight will feel pointless, and we don't want that. For our example, Linus is left alone with his enemy. Regalius is gone for good. Taking the empty blade in hand, Linus stands up to Gabriel one last time with faith in himself. Gabriel, expecting the poor boy to cower, is taken off guard by Linus's charge. Linus presses his advantage and barely pulls out a victory using his own skill. With our final battle at an end, it's time to wrap this plot up. Title your final section, Resolution. Your hero has changed, either for the better or the worst. They have learned their lesson and became a more enlightened person, or failed to learn their lesson and suffered greatly. Either way, every good story must end. Write down a small handful of scenes that will demonstrate how your character has changed from this experience. Here are a few ideas you can use to write a satisfying ending. You You could put your character in a similar scene as the beginning, but show how they handle it differently. You can hint to a new inciting incident that would have terrified your protagonist before, but now they are ready to meet the challenge with an enlightened mind. Good way to tease a sequel. Or you can show your protagonist becoming a mentor to a new generation that may be struggling with the same problem your protagonist has overcome. For our example, Linus will bury Regalius where no one would find him. He has missed the fencing finals and lost his chance to become champion, but we show that he is content. His rival takes the trophy, but Linus is just happy knowing that he and his family are safe. We end the story with Linus teaching fencing to a group of young students. He gives them a lesson on self-worth and how to not base their entire identity on their success. However you decide to end your story, it should feel natural. If you followed all of the steps up to this point, you may already know exactly how to end your story. This level of predictability is not a bad thing. Despite popular belief, readers love it when a good story has an ending that they can kinda see coming. It's a satisfying catharsis that allows them to feel as if they have improved as people by living vicariously through your protagonist. Trying to make your ending unpredictable on purpose does nothing but hurt your story. Now that our first draft of our outline is done, it is time to move on to the pillar that is going to make or break your book. You may be under the impression that your outline is finished. If you're a pantser, then sure, it kind of is, but if you're a plotter, sit the hell back down, bucko! What we have written down right now is a series of events that fit more or less into the hero's journey. This is all well and good, but if you were to begin writing right now, you might find it difficult to translate these bullet points into prose. This is where pacing comes in. When I talk about pacing, I don't mean simply adding a bunch of high-octane fight scenes all over the place. Fast pacing is not the same as good pacing. A book filled with nothing but meaningless fight scenes will not make for a good story. Pretty sick YouTube video, but not a good book. Pacing is probably the most important pillar of the three. A book with ridiculous characters, silly dialogue, nonsensical world building can still be a hell of a page turner if pacing is airtight. The best way I can explain pacing easily is to imagine a series of funnels. Each funnel represents a scene or chapter in chronological order. As your reader turns the pages, they are pouring their attention into the first funnel. If your chapters and scenes are done correctly, their attention is forced down to this tiny point and into the next funnel until they reach the end. So how do we construct our outline into this funnel shape? Well, we kind of already have. If you look at our hero's journey, we laid out goals, wants, needs, challenges, and antagonists that forced our hero down a path no matter how hard they may have tried to escape their destiny. As their journey begins, they are forced down the funnel toward the climax with nowhere else to go but forward. Since our reader follows the protagonist, they too are forced down this funnel as they continue to read the story. To ensure that they never escape, we must construct every chapter and scene with their own mini versions of this funnel. Whatever happens in your scene, always make sure there is some kind of pressure. Let's imagine a scene from the beginning of our example story. A scene where Linus is walking home from fencing practice. If we were to write out this scene with nothing but descriptions of the surroundings, descriptions of the character, and a boring daily routine, our funnel has sprung a leak. There is nothing forcing Linus or our reader by extension forward in the plot. Let's fix that. We add in the lingering feeling that he is being followed by a rough sort, foreshadowing the mugging that comes later, and adding a mini antagonist to this scene or chapter. Linus wants to get home safely. The potential mugger may prevent that. He must find a way. Now we have something interesting. We have pressure. This paranoia shows how Linus is timid and fearful while also giving us something far more visceral to write into our prose that will keep our readers hooked. This pressure is what is pushing our reader and our protagonist forward into the plot. It is imperative that you give every scene and chapter this exact level of thought. Every scene should either advance the character's arc or directly advance the plot from one point to the next. This will require a lot of work, but I promise you it will be worth it in the long run. I know I said this already, but this will make or break your book. You can't afford to get lazy when building this pillar. Think of it this way. This is the part where you get to be creative and express yourself. Many newer authors believe that the hero's journey template or a similar template will make their writing too similar to everyone else's, but that simply isn't true. Every author handles pacing differently, and the quality of your pacing will be what makes you unique. How you decide to structure your chapters and stitch together the events of your hero's journey will be your one-of-a-kind mark on the world. Treat it with care, for it will be the soul of your story. With all of that in mind, start writing out an outline for your chapters. Write down a chapter heading and a short paragraph describing what happens in that chapter. Be sure to include an isolated goal and an antagonist or challenge to that goal in each scene. It doesn't need to be a villain or your main bad guy, it just needs to be some kind of difficulty to apply pressure. Take your time here. This will be the tentative plan that will help bridge the gap between your plot and the first draft. And there you have it. By now, you should have a decent outline ready to go. We have briefly touched on character arcs, themes, and pacing. With these 3 pillars, you will have a powerful foundation to build your story upon. Please watch this video again when you get to work on your next book. It takes a lot of practice to be able to understand the 3 pillars of a good story, and sometimes it's easy to forget how one of the pillars is built. If you have any questions or are struggling with any part of this outline, leave a comment below and I will do my best to answer it with a video or in a response. You can also join my Discord server linked below where you can discuss your work with other authors. I hope you all found this video useful, and I will see you all next time. Peace!